Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to sink your teeth into something juicy?
Always up for a good deep dive, especially when it involves unpacking a phenomenon like Twilight.
And let's be clear, we're not just talking about revisiting a sparkly vampire romance. This is about digging into what made the story so wildly popular and what it reveals about us as readers and, let's face it, as humans drawn to stories of desire, danger, and yeah, maybe a little bit of brooding romance.
It's interesting you say that because right from the start, our source points out just how unconventional Twilight is, especially when it comes to our protagonist, Bella Swan.
Right. She's not your typical heroine. In fact, she's described as kind of awkward, introspective.
Yeah, not exactly the fearless vampire slayer you might expect.
Which is fascinating because that seems to be a big part of what makes her so relatable to some readers, while others find her, well, a little frustrating.
Totally. And that's where this deep dive gets really interesting. Can we call Bella weak? Is that too simple? The source dives into this, exploring how Bella's vulnerability and emotional intelligence might actually be strengths in disguise. Like, maybe she represents a different kind of courage, one we don't always see celebrated in pop culture.
Ooh, that's good. Courage doesn't always have to be about physical strength or being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's about embracing your vulnerability, even when it feels scary. What do you think, listeners? Does true strength come from within? It's something to ponder as we delve deeper into Bella's world. And that's what I find so interesting about Bella. She's not this, like, super assertive go-getter, and yet she's driven by this deep desire for something more, something extraordinary, and that yearning for connection becomes this powerful force in the story.
Absolutely, and it really challenges those traditional ideas of what a strong female character should be like,
Right.
right? It like, does she have to be all independent and like rejecting societal expectations? Bella's definitely not afraid to want that deep connection, even if it means upending her entire life.
Which, let's be real, is something I think a lot of us can relate to. That longing for something that maybe goes against the grain or even scares us a little.
For sure. But is it empowering, this yearning for connection? Or does it kind of feed into those, like, maybe not so healthy relationship tropes we see sometimes?
That's the big question, and honestly, the fact that there's no easy answer is what makes Twilight and Bella so fascinating. But we can't forget Edward in all of this, right? He's half of this equation.
Right. Edward Cullen, our sparkly, brooding, oh-so-complicated vampire heartthrob. Our source describes him as brooding and paradoxical, and I think that's spot on. He's this walking contradiction, a vampire who falls head over heels for a human girl. Talk about an identity crisis waiting to happen. What makes Edward so interesting, though, is that he really embodies this clash between two worlds. He's totally drawn to Bella's human energy, her vitality, but he's also chained to this whole vampire existence. Like, he's got the power, he's got immortality, but at the same time, he's constantly battling his own nature, constantly afraid of hurting Bella.
It's almost like his strength is also his weakness, you
Well,
know? Like, I'm thinking about that part in the source where it talks about how Edward sees his immortality as a curse.
oh, absolutely. That's huge. It's like he's frozen in time, stuck reliving the same patterns, the same regrets for over a century. Makes you wonder if being forever young is all it's cracked up to be. I mean, can you imagine?
It's kind of a terrifying thought, actually, to be stuck at one age forever, never really moving forward. No wonder he's so drawn to Bella's humanness.
Right. Like, she represents everything he's lost, everything he can't have anymore. The beauty of a fleeting moment, the joy of experiencing the world for the first time. It's kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. He's drawn to her mortality, her vulnerability, because it reminds him of what it means to truly live.
Which I think speaks to something very human. That desire for what we can't have, that thing you crave so much, but you know if you actually got it, it wouldn't be as special. Edward's whole existence is that dilemma. Wanting Bella, but knowing that being with her means he has to constantly suppress his true nature.
Exactly. And that struggle, that constant push and pull, that's where things get really complicated. The source talks about how that struggle manifests in Edward's controlling behavior, which adds a whole other layer to their relationship.
It's true. Well, intense is one word for it, and I think it's easy to get caught up in debating whether it's romantic or possessive, but maybe that's part of the appeal, right? This whole, like, Edward's a good guy, but is he? It forces us to think about love and power and how fear, even with the best intentions, can get messy.
Totally. And we can't talk about Twilight without talking about, well, vampires. Why are we so drawn to these creatures, especially in stories for young adults? Like, what is it about them that just grabs our imaginations?
Right. It's like, why vampires? Why not werewolves or something?
Exactly. And the source makes this really interesting point about how, especially in YA fiction, Vampires kind of represent those really intense desires and fears that come with growing up. Like that whole figuring out who you are, what you want, it can feel as scary as it is exciting. And I think vampires embody that perfectly.
Oh, that's so true. They're both alluring and terrifying, just like that transition from adolescence to adulthood.
Right. Like you're on the edge of something new and unknown. And it's both exciting and terrifying.
And what I find interesting is how Stephanie Meyer kind of twists those classic vampire tropes. Like in a lot of stories, they're all about the violence, the bloodlust, but in Twilight, there's this focus on their internal struggle for control.
Right. It's less about the monster under the bed and more about the monster we wrestle with inside ourselves.
Totally. Edward battling his thirst for Bella's blood, it's such a powerful metaphor for the temptations we all face in our own lives, you know? Those moments where you know you shouldn't, but that little voice inside is like, do it.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's that extra slice of cake or like putting off that thing you really need to do, we all have those internal battles. And I love that line from Bella where she says Edward is more tempting than any drug.
Ooh, yeah. Because it really highlights that pull towards something that feels so good, so alluring, even if you know deep down it might not be good for you.
Right. It's that classic forbidden fruit scenario that's as old as time.
Mm.
And Bella's choice to be with Edward, to eventually become a vampire herself, it's like the ultimate act of rebellion, isn't it?
Hmm.
Choosing the unknown over the safety and security of a normal life.
That's such a good point. She's choosing passion and intensity and this whole other world over everything she's ever known. It makes you think, would you rather play it safe and live a maybe predictable life, or risk it all for something extraordinary, even if it scares you a little?
Right. It's like, do you choose comfort or do you choose adventure?
Hmm.
And neither answer is wrong, which is what makes these stories so thought-provoking.
It's true. There's no right or wrong answer, and that's what makes discussing these books so interesting. Because we're not just talking about vampires and werewolves, we're talking about very human choices and desires. We're grappling with big questions about love, sacrifice, the weight of immortality, the beauty of a life that doesn't last forever.
Exactly. And even if you weren't a diehard fan of the series, you can't deny the impact it had. Twilight sparked so many conversations about romance, agency, and like what we expect from our stories. It was a cultural phenomenon, and it definitely paved the way for a lot of other stories that explore these themes in new and interesting ways.
Totally. It challenged our expectations of what a love story could be. And honestly, it gave us permission to embrace those darker, messier sides of ourselves.
Absolutely. So whether you were Team Edward or Team Jacob, I think we can all agree that Twilight sparked something important.
This has been awesome. So
Mhm.
many juicy things to think about desire and choice and what it means to really be alive.
Mm.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with me.
Always a pleasure. It's these complex, sometimes messy stories that really make us think, and those are my favorite kinds of deep
Me
dives.
too. And to our amazing listeners, remember what our source said. Twilight, it's a place where we belong, even if that place exists in the shadows. So as you go about your day, think about that. What shadows do you find yourself drawn to? What do those hidden desires reveal about you? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.